Meet Riley Phoenix Carter, 28 years old, auburn hair often pulled back in a simple ponytail. Petite frame standing barely 5 feet 4, with striking emerald eyes that seemed to hold secrets she never shared. She had been coming to Iron Peak Fitness Center in downtown Millbrook for 3 months now, always arriving at 5:30 a.m. sharp when the gym was nearly empty, always leaving before the morning rush began. Riley worked as a night shift security guard at the local medical complex, a quiet job that paid the bills but didn't require much interaction with people. That's exactly how she preferred it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The regulars at Iron Peak had noticed her, of course. How could they not? She was the woman who spent most of her time on the treadmill, jogging at a steady pace for exactly 45 minutes before moving to the mats for basic stretching. She never touched the free weights, never approached the squat racks, and certainly never ventured into the MMA training area where the serious athletes worked out. She carried herself with an almost invisible presence, like someone who had perfected the art of blending into the background. The gym's culture was dominated by a core group of fitness enthusiasts who had been training there for years. Led by Trevor "Tank" Morrison, a former college football player who now worked as a personal trainer, they had established an unspoken hierarchy. Tank was built like his nickname suggested, -6'2", of pure muscle with arms the size of tree trunks and a personality to match. He held court near the heavy bag area every morning, surrounded by his usual crew, Jake "Bulldog" Stevens, a stocky power lifter who could bench press 400 pounds, but never let anyone forget it. Marcus "Viper" Rodriguez, a local MMA fighter who trained for upcoming matches, and Danny "Diesel" Brooks, a CrossFit enthusiast who treated every workout like a personal competition. These men had created an atmosphere where only the strongest, loudest, and most aggressive seemed to belong. They would grunt loudly during their sets, slam weights down with unnecessary force, and engage in constant banter about their latest personal records. New members, especially women, were often intimidated by their presence. Many joined Iron Peak with enthusiasm, only to quietly cancel their memberships after a few weeks of feeling unwelcome. Riley had somehow managed to become completely invisible to this group. She was just the treadmill girl to them, someone who occupied space, but didn't really matter in their world of serious training. They had never seen her lift anything heavier than a 5-pound dumbbell during her stretching routine. She wore simple black leggings and oversized t-shirts that completely hid her physique. Her workouts appeared basic, almost timid compared to the intensity surrounding her. "She's probably just trying to lose a few pounds," Jake had commented one morning, loud enough for Riley to hear. "Cardio queens never last long in a real gym like this." Tank had laughed, his voice booming across the gym floor. "Give her 2 more weeks max. Once she realizes she's not going to get Instagram ready doing 30-minute jogs, she'd be gone." Riley had continued her stretching routine without so much as a glance in their direction. She had developed an remarkable ability to appear completely unbothered by comments and conversations happening around her. Her face remained neutral, her breathing steady, her movements controlled. To anyone watching, she seemed either completely oblivious to the mockery or simply too passive to care. But there were small details that might have given away something more, if anyone had been paying attention. The way she moved had an economy to it, no wasted motion, no unnecessary energy expended. When she stretched, her flexibility was extraordinary, not the limited range of motion most people achieved, but the kind of mobility that suggested years of serious training. Her running form was flawless, her breathing controlled in a way that indicated significant cardiovascular conditioning. Most tellingly, she wore a simple black fitness tracker that never seemed to record the kind of elevated heart rate that her seemingly moderate workouts should have produced. Riley also had a small habit that she thought no one noticed. During her stretching routine, she would occasionally glance toward the MMA training area, her eyes following the movements of the fighters with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what they were doing. She would watch their footwork, their combinations, their defensive positioning, and something would flicker across her expression, not admiration, but evaluation. Like she was mentally noting techniques, identifying weaknesses, calculating improvements. 3 months of this routine had established Riley as a fixture at Iron Peak, but a forgettable one. She was the quiet woman in the corner who minded her own business, stayed in her lane, and never caused any trouble. She had successfully cultivated an image of someone who was trying her best, but clearly out of her league in a gym, full of serious athletes. The morning everything changed started. Exactly like every other morning. Riley arrived at 5:30 a.m., changed into her usual workout attire, and began her routine on treadmill number 7. Tank and his crew were already deep into their morning session, the sound of clanging weights and aggressive encouragement filling the air. The gym had its usual energy, intense, competitive, and completely oblivious to the woman who was about to shatter every assumption they had ever made about her. "Hey, security guard," Tank called out during a rest between sets, his voice carrying that familiar tone of condescending amusement. "You've been coming here for months. When are you gonna try some real training?" Riley continued running, her pace steady, her expression unchanged. She had heard variations of this comment dozens of times before, but today, something was different. Today, circumstances were about to force her hand in a way that would reveal exactly who Riley Phoenix Carter really was and why she had spent 3 months hiding in plain sight. Have you ever been completely underestimated by people who had no idea what you were truly capable of? Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one with the most dangerous skills. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Iron Peak Fitness Center wasn't just a gym, it was a battlefield disguised as a wellness facility. Located in the heart of Millbrook's industrial district, the 8,000 square foot space had been converted from an old warehouse, maintaining its raw concrete floors and exposed steel beams. The owner, a former Army drill sergeant named Victor Sarge Kellerman, had designed it specifically to attract serious athletes, not casual fitness enthusiasts looking for a comfortable workout experience. The gym's layout reflected this philosophy. The main floor was dominated by an impressive array of free weights, power racks, and Olympic lifting platforms. Heavy bags hung from reinforced ceiling mounts, while a regulation-sized boxing ring occupied the center of the MMA training area. The walls were lined with motivational posters featuring quotes from legendary fighters and military leaders. "Pain is weakness leaving the body" was painted in bold letters across the main wall, visible from every corner of the facility. The membership at Iron Peak was carefully curated through Sarge's old-school approach to fitness. He didn't advertise on social media or offer newcomer discounts. Word of mouth brought people in, and only the committed stayed. The monthly fee was deliberately set high enough to deter casual members, and Sarge had no problem canceling memberships for people who didn't fit his vision of what a serious gym should be. This selective approach had created a unique ecosystem. The 6 a.m. crowd consisted of about 30 regular members, mostly men in their 20s and 30s, who treated their morning workouts like religious ceremonies. They had established an unspoken code of conduct that revolved around intensity, aggression, and the constant pursuit of physical superiority. Weakness was not tolerated, excuses were mocked, and anyone who didn't push themselves to the absolute limit was considered a waste of space. Tank Morrison had emerged as the unofficial leader of this group, through sheer force of personality and impressive physical capabilities. His background as a college football player gave him credibility, but it was his ability to motivate others through intimidation that really set him apart. He had transformed his personal training business into a cult-like following where clients paid premium rates, not just for workout guidance, but for the privilege of being part of his inner circle. The hierarchy at Iron Peak was clearly defined. Tank's core group, Jake, Marcus, and Danny, formed the top tier, followed by a rotating cast of aspiring members who desperately wanted to prove themselves worthy of inclusion. Below them were the regular members who kept to themselves, but still commanded respect through their consistent effort and obvious strength. At the bottom were the occasional newcomers who usually didn't last long enough to matter. Women were a rare sight at Iron Peak, and those who did venture in faced an uphill battle for acceptance. The prevailing attitude wasn't overtly hostile, but it was dismissive in a way that made it clear they were considered temporary visitors. In a man's world, Tank and his crew would often make comments about women taking up space or not understanding real training, always loud enough to be heard, but never quite direct enough to be called out for harassment. The gym's culture was reinforced through daily rituals that had evolved over years of shared training. Every morning began with Tank's crew claiming the same stations, using the same equipment, and engaging in the same competitive banter. They would critique each other's form, challenge each other to lift heavier weights, and constantly reference their latest achievements. New members were expected to earn their place through demonstrated strength and unwavering commitment. Sarge himself contributed to this atmosphere through his hands-off management style. He believed that respect had to be earned, not given, and that the gym's environment would naturally separate the serious athletes from the pretenders. He rarely intervened in conflicts between members, preferring to let them work things out according to gym culture. His military background had taught him that hierarchies were natural and necessary for maintaining order. The equipment at Iron Peak reflected this no-nonsense approach. Everything was built for serious training, heavy-duty power racks that could handle massive loads, Olympic barbells that had been tested by years of aggressive use, and dumbbells that went up to weights most commercial gyms wouldn't even stock. The cardio equipment was minimal and positioned along the walls, clearly secondary to the strength training focus. Even the mirrors were positioned to reflect the lifting areas, not the treadmills. Music played a crucial role in maintaining the gym's aggressive atmosphere. Tank controlled the sound system, keeping it locked on heavy metal and hardcore rap tracks that matched the intensity of the workouts. The volume was always set just loud enough to energize the serious lifters while making it difficult for anyone to have quiet conversations. This auditory environment reinforced the message that Iron Peak was a place for intense training, not social interaction. The morning routine at Iron Peak had become as predictable as clockwork. Tank's crew would arrive at 5:15 a.m., immediately claiming their territory near the heavy equipment. By 5:30, they would be deep into their warm-up routines, filling the space with the sounds of clanging weights and aggressive encouragement. Other members would filter in, automatically adjusting their own routines to avoid conflicts with the established hierarchy. Riley had somehow found a way to exist within this environment without challenging its fundamental structure. She had identified the spaces that nobody else wanted, the treadmills that faced away from the main lifting area, the stretching mats in the corner where serious athletes never ventured, the time slots when the equipment she needed was always available. She had become an expert at reading the gym's energy, timing her movements to avoid interactions, and maintaining her invisibility. But invisibility in a place like Iron Peak was a double-edged sword. While it protected her from direct confrontation, it also meant that she was completely underestimated by people who had no idea what they were really dealing with. The culture that had made her feel safe in her anonymity was about to become the very thing that would force her to reveal exactly who she was. Have you ever found yourself in an environment where you had to hide your true capabilities just to avoid unwanted attention? Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who've learned to blend in perfectly. The pattern of dismissal had started on Riley's very first day at Iron Peak and had only intensified over the 3 months she'd been training there. It wasn't malicious in the traditional sense, it was worse. It was the kind of casual, systematic disregard that made it clear she simply didn't register as someone worth acknowledging in their world of serious fitness. Tank had set the tone during Riley's second week when she was stretching near the mats after her usual treadmill session. He had been demonstrating proper deadlift form to a new client, his voice booming across the gym as he explained the importance of maintaining proper posture under heavy loads. You see, this is what separates real athletes from weekend warriors, he had announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. Real training requires commitment, intensity, and the willingness to push beyond your comfort zone. As if on cue, his eyes had swept across the gym and landed on Riley, who was quietly working through her stretching routine. Unlike some people who think jogging and touching their toes counts as a workout, he had added with a smirk. His client had laughed, and several other members had looked in Riley's direction with knowing grins. Riley had continued her stretches without so much as a glance in their direction, her face maintaining the same neutral expression she wore every morning. Jake had picked up on Tank's lead and made it his personal mission to provide commentary on Riley's workouts. "There goes the cardio queen again," he would announce whenever Riley stepped onto the treadmill. "Same speed, same time, same boring routine. I don't know why she even bothers paying for a membership when she could just walk around the block for free." His observations always drew chuckles from the other members, reinforcing the idea that Riley's presence was more of a mild entertainment than a serious training effort. Marcus had developed his own approach to the dismissal pattern. As an MMA fighter, he considered himself an expert on functional fitness and combat conditioning. Whenever Riley would stretch near the mats, he would make loud comments about people who confused flexibility with actual strength. He would demonstrate various combat moves to his training partners, always speaking just loud enough for Riley to hear. "Real fighters need explosive power, not dance class stretches," he would say while throwing combinations at the heavy bag. "You can't yoga your way out of a real fight." Danny's contribution to the pattern was perhaps the most systematic. As a CrossFit enthusiast, he believed in the superiority of high-intensity, varied workouts over what he called steady-state cardio. Mediocrity. He would often time his own cardio sessions to coincide with Riley's, stepping onto the treadmill next to hers and immediately cranking the speed, and incline to levels that made his workout obviously more challenging. "This is how you actually burn calories," he would announce to anyone within earshot, his breathing heavy as he pushed through intervals that left him drenched in sweat. The pattern wasn't limited to Tank's core group. Other members had picked up on the established dynamic and added their own variations. Tommy Martinez, a bodybuilder who trained for local competitions, would make comments about people who wasted their time with baby weights whenever Riley used the 5-pound dumbbells for her stretching routine. Sarah Chun, one of the few other women who trained regularly at Iron Peak, had initially tried to be friendly, but eventually started treating Riley with the same dismissive attitude as everyone else, perhaps feeling the need to distance herself from someone who was clearly not serious about fitness. The gym staff had also absorbed this culture of dismissal. Kevin Walsh, the part-time desk attendant who worked the morning shift, would barely acknowledge Riley when she signed in, often continuing his conversation with other members as if she wasn't even there. When Riley had questions about gym policies or equipment availability, Kevin would give her the briefest possible answers before immediately turning his attention to members he considered more important. Even Sarge himself had fallen into the pattern, though his approach was more subtle. During his occasional walks through the gym floor, he would stop to chat with the serious lifters, offering encouragement and technical advice. When his path took him past Riley's treadmill, he would keep walking without acknowledgement, as if she was simply part of the equipment rather than a paying member, deserving of his attention. The dismissal pattern had become so ingrained that it operated on autopilot. Members would walk past Riley's workout area without making eye contact, claim equipment near her without asking if she was using it, and engage in conversations about training techniques as if she couldn't possibly contribute anything meaningful to the discussion. Her 3 months of consistent attendance had earned her exactly 0 recognition or respect from the Iron Peak community. Riley's response to this systematic dismissal had been remarkably consistent. She never reacted to the comments, never defended herself against the implied criticisms, and never attempted to prove her worth through any display of knowledge or ability. When Tank made his loud pronouncements about real training, she would continue her routine without pause. When Jake announced her presence as the cardio queen, she would maintain her steady pace on the treadmill. When Marcus demonstrated his combat techniques with obvious condescension, she would finish her stretches and quietly move to the next part of her routine. What made the dismissal particularly painful was that it extended beyond just her training. When Riley would use the water fountain, people would walk past her to use the one on the other side of the gym. When she would hang her towel in the designated area, others would move theirs to different hooks as if hers carried some kind of contamination. During the few times she had attempted to make casual conversation while stretching, she had been met with polite but clearly disinterested responses that made it clear she was interrupting more important activities. The systematic nature of the COVSA dismissal had created an environment where Riley existed in a kind of social vacuum. She was physically present in the gym every morning, but she might as well have been invisible for all the recognition she received as a legitimate member of the Iron Peak community. 3 months of consistent attendance, punctual arrival, and respectful behavior had earned her exactly nothing in terms of acceptance or acknowledgement, but Riley had endured it all with the same quiet patience that characterized everything else about her gym persona. She had perfected the art of appearing completely unbothered by treatment that would have driven most people to either confront their tormentors or simply find a different gym. Her ability to absorb the dismissal without reaction had become part of her identity at Iron Peak, reinforcing the very behavior that made her seem weak and irrelevant. The irony, of course, was that Riley's patience wasn't born from timidity or lack of confidence. It was the patience of someone who had learned to endure far worse treatment than anything Iron Peak could dish out. It was the patience of someone who understood that true strength often required the discipline to hide your capabilities until the moment when revealing them would serve a greater purpose. Have you ever been in a situation where people's dismissive treatment of you actually revealed more about their character than yours? Sometimes the way people treat those they consider beneath them shows you exactly who they really are. The incident that first hinted at Riley's hidden capabilities happened on a humid Thursday morning in late September, exactly 11 weeks after she had started training at Iron Peak. The gym's air conditioning system had been struggling all week, and the combination of heavy exertion and poor ventilation had created an atmosphere thick with tension and discomfort. Most members were cutting their workouts short, but Tank's crew had made it a point of pride to maintain their usual intensity. Despite the challenging conditions, Marcus had been working through a particularly aggressive heavy bag session, preparing for an upcoming amateur MMA bout that he'd been talking about for weeks. His combinations were getting sloppier as fatigue set in, but his ego wouldn't allow him to acknowledge the heat was affecting his performance. Sweat was pouring down his face, his breathing was labored, and his usual precise footwork had deteriorated into flat-footed slugging. Riley was finishing her stretching routine on the mats about 15 feet away, working through the same flexibility sequence she performed every morning. She had positioned herself with her back to the MMA area, appearing to pay no attention to Marcus's training session. Her movements were fluid and controlled, showing none of the strain that the oppressive heat was causing everyone else in the gym. Marcus threw a particularly wild hook at the heavy bag, putting too much power behind the punch and failing to maintain proper balance. His follow-through carried him too far forward, his stance collapsed, and he stumbled directly toward the weight rack behind him. The momentum was carrying him straight into the sharp corner of a 45-pound plate that had been left protruding from the rack at exactly head height. What happened next occurred so quickly that most people in the gym missed it entirely. Riley, who had appeared completely focused on her stretching routine, somehow sensed the danger developing behind her. Without looking, without any apparent awareness of Marcus's predicament, she smoothly transitioned from her seated hamstring stretch into a backwards roll that brought her directly into Marcus's path. The collision looked completely accidental. Riley appeared to simply roll backwards at the exact moment Marcus stumbled forward, their bodies making contact just enough to alter his trajectory. Instead of striking the weight rack face first, Marcus found himself off balance but safely, redirected toward the open mat space. He went down hard, but onto the padded surface rather than into the unforgiving steel. "Sorry," Riley said immediately, her voice carrying just the right tone of embarrassed apology. "I didn't see you there. Are you okay?" Marcus, still catching his breath and trying to process what had happened, initially appeared ready to explode with anger. He had been planning to unleash a tirade about people not paying attention to their surroundings, but something about the incident felt off. The timing had been too perfect, the physics too convenient. Riley's role had been executed with a fluidity that seemed inconsistent with an accidental movement. "Yeah, I'm fine," Marcus said slowly, his eyes studying Riley's face for any sign of intentionality. But her expression showed only genuine concern and mild embarrassment. "Just watch where you're going next time." "Of course," Riley replied, returning to her stretching position as if nothing significant had occurred. "I'll be more careful." Tank and the others had witnessed the incident, but interpreted it exactly as Riley had presented it, an unfortunate accident that had somehow prevented a much worse accident. Jake actually laughed about it, making jokes about Marcus being saved by the cardio queen's clumsiness. The irony was lost on all of them, but Tommy Martinez, the bodybuilder who had then spotting someone nearby, had seen the entire sequence from a different angle. He had watched Riley's eyes track Marcus's movement in the mirror, had seen her body tense slightly before she initiated the roll, and had noticed the precise control she maintained throughout the maneuver. Tommy was experienced enough in athletic movement to recognize that what he had witnessed was not accidental. However, when Tommy mentioned his observations to Sarah Chun later that morning, she dismissed them immediately. "Come on, Tommy, you really think the treadmill girl deliberately body-checked Marcus? She probably didn't even know he was there until they collided. Some people just have good reflexes." The incident might have been forgotten entirely if not for what happened the following week. Danny had been attempting a new CrossFit routine that involved rapid transitions between different exercises. He was moving from box jumps to kettlebell swings, pushing himself to maintain an aggressive pace despite obvious fatigue. His form was deteriorating with each repetition, but his competitive nature wouldn't allow him to slow down. During one particularly sloppy transition, Danny's foot caught the edge of the box, sending him tumbling backward with a 35-pound kettlebell still in his hands. The weight was on track to come down directly on his chest, a scenario that could easily result in broken ribs or worse. Danny's own momentum was carrying him down too fast for him to control the kettlebell's path. Riley happened to be walking past the CrossFit area on her way to the water fountain. As Danny began to fall, she stumbled slightly, her water bottle slipping from her hand. In reaching to catch the bottle, she bumped into the kettlebell rack, causing it to shift just enough to alter the path of Danny's fall. Instead of landing flat on his back, Danny found himself rolling sideways, the kettlebell missing his body entirely and landing harmlessly on the mat beside him. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," Riley exclaimed, rushing to help Danny to his feet. I'm Such a klutz. Are you hurt? Danny, shaken but uninjured, initially seemed ready to blame Riley for causing his fall. But when he replayed the sequence in his mind, he realized that her clumsiness had actually prevented what could have been a serious injury. The timing was remarkable, but the explanation seemed simple enough. Sometimes accidents prevent worse accidents. No, I'm fine, Danny said, accepting Riley's help getting back to his feet. Actually, if you hadn't bumped that rack, this could have been a lot worse. Thanks, I guess. Riley smiled with apparent relief. Well, I'm glad. My coordination problems worked out for someone. I'll try to be more careful walking around the equipment. Once again, the incident was interpreted as an unfortunate accident rather than an intentional intervention. Tank's crew joked about Riley being a good luck charm for preventing injuries, completely missing the implications of what they had witnessed. The idea that the quiet woman who spent her time on the treadmill could have the awareness and skill to execute split-second interventions was simply outside their conception of reality. But Kevin Walsh, the desk attendant, had been watching the security camera feeds when both incidents occurred. From the elevated camera angles, he could see details that weren't visible from ground level. He had watched Riley track Marcus's movement in the mirror before initiating her roll. He had seen her eyes lock onto Danny's kettlebell the moment it became unstable. Most tellingly, he had observed her positioning herself in exactly the right place to intervene in both situations. Kevin mentioned his observations to Sarge during a quiet moment later that week. Boss, I think that quiet woman who comes in every morning might be more than she appears. I've been watching the camera feeds, and some of the things she's done don't add up to accidents. But the challenge coin would remain in her pocket, a small reminder that some skills never fade and some training never truly ends. It was a talisman that connected her to who she had been while anchoring her to who she needed to be now. And every morning, as Tank and his crew dismissed her as irrelevant, Riley would touch the coin through her pocket and remember that some battles are won not by demonstrating your strength, but by having the discipline to hide it until the moment it's truly needed. Have you ever had to completely hide a part of yourself that you were proud of because circumstances required you to be someone different? Sometimes the greatest strength is the ability to carry your true self in silence. Riley Phoenix Carter had been born into a military family where excellence wasn't just expected, it was the only acceptable standard. Her father, Master Chief Petty Officer James Phoenix Carter, had earned his nickname during 23 years of service with the Navy SEALs, becoming a legend within the special operations community for his ability to rise from impossible situations stronger than before. Her mother, Dr. Amanda Carter, was a trauma surgeon who had spent her career patching up special operations personnel in field hospitals around the world. Growing up on Naval Base Coronado in California, Riley had been surrounded by the culture of elite military performance from her earliest memories. While other children played with dolls and video games, Riley was learning to swim in the Pacific Ocean, running obstacle courses designed for adult Navy personnel, and absorbing lessons about mental toughness that most people never encountered in their entire lives. Her childhood wasn't harsh, but it was undeniably intense. James Carter had recognized something special in his daughter when she was barely 8 years old. During a family beach outing, Riley had noticed a tourist struggling in a riptide about 50 yards offshore while adult beachgoers stood paralyzed by the situation. Without hesitation, she had grabbed her father's attention and pointed out the most efficient rescue approach, mapping out current patterns and timing that impressed even the experienced rescue swimmers who eventually carried out the operation. "That girl sees 3 moves ahead," James had told his wife that night. "She's got the mind for this work." The training had begun informally at first. Father-daughter camping trips that happened to include navigation exercises using only natural landmarks. family swimming sessions that evolved into underwater endurance challenges, weekend hikes that incorporated stealth movement and environmental awareness. Riley absorbed these lessons naturally, displaying an aptitude for tactical thinking that surpassed many adult special operations candidates. By age 14, Riley was regularly outperforming Navy SEAL trainees on physical fitness assessments that her father administered during his instructor duties. She could swim 2 miles in open ocean, run 8 miles without stopping, and execute hand-to-hand combat techniques with precision that made grown men uncomfortable. More importantly, she possessed the mental discipline to remain calm and analytical. Under extreme pressure, her younger brother David had been born when Riley was 8, and from the beginning, their relationship had been defined by her protective instincts. David was everything Riley wasn't: gentle, artistic, fascinated by music and literature rather than physical challenges. James Carter had initially tried to apply the same training approach to David, but quickly realized that his son's gifts lay in completely different areas. This realization had actually strengthened the family dynamic, with Riley becoming David's protector and David becoming Riley's emotional anchor. Riley's formal military career had begun at 17 when she received a congressional nomination to the Naval Academy, graduating 4 years later in the top 5% of her class. Her academy performance had been remarkable not just for her academic achievements, but for her leadership abilities and her capacity to excel in every aspect of military training. She had been recruited directly into the Navy SEALs pipeline, one of only 12 women in history to successfully complete the full training program. Her SEAL career had spanned 8 years and included deployments to Afghanistan, Syria, and several classified locations that she could never discuss with civilian contacts. Riley had earned the respect of her teammates not through dramatic heroics, but through consistent excellence under pressure. She was the operator who never made mistakes when mistakes could cost lives. She was the teammate who could be trusted with the most dangerous assignments because failure simply wasn't in her vocabulary. Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez had become both Riley's commanding officer and her mentor during her final 3 years of active duty. Elena had recognized that Riley possessed a rare combination of tactical brilliance and emotional intelligence that made her invaluable for operations requiring both precision and adaptability. Under Elena's leadership, Riley had participated in hostage rescues, counter-terrorism operations, and intelligence-gathering missions that had saved hundreds of civilian lives. The night that changed everything had started as a routine intelligence-gathering operation in Afghanistan. Riley's team had been tasked with locating and eliminating a high-value target who was planning attacks on American civilian contractors. The mission had been going perfectly until a communication breakdown led to Riley's team being surrounded by hostile forces in an abandoned compound 30 miles from their extraction point. During the firefight that followed, Riley had made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. When her teammate Marcus Thompson had been wounded and trapped in an exposed position, Riley had abandoned her assigned position to execute a solo rescue operation. Her action had saved Marcus's life, but had exposed her to shrapnel from an improvised explosive device that caused severe damage to her left shoulder and right knee. The physical injuries had healed within 18 months, but the psychological impact had been more complicated. Riley had always prided herself on following orders precisely and never taking unnecessary risks that could compromise mission success. Her decision to break protocol, even for good reasons, had created a crisis of confidence that affected her performance in subsequent operations. The final blow had come 6 months after her medical clearance for full duty. David, who had been attending college on a music scholarship, had been involved in a car accident that left him with traumatic brain injury requiring full-time care. Their parents, both still on active duty, were stationed overseas and unable to provide the constant supervision that David's condition required. Riley had faced an impossible choice: continue her Navy SEAL career that meant everything to her professionally, or resign her commission to become David's primary caregiver. The decision had torn her apart for weeks, but ultimately there had been no real choice at all. David needed her, and family loyalty had always been the Carter family's highest value. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez had been the one to help Riley process the decision during their final conversation before her resignation. "You're not leaving because you failed," Elena had told her in the quiet of her office. "You're leaving because you're exactly the kind of person we need in special operations, someone who understands that some missions are more important than careers." The transition to civilian life had been brutal. Riley had spent 3 years learning to be invisible, to suppress the instincts and training that had defined her adult identity. She had taken jobs that utilized none of her real skills, lived in places that felt nothing like home, and developed the ability to present herself as someone completely unremarkable. Working night security at Millbrook Medical Complex had been perfect for her situation. The job paid enough to cover David's care expenses while allowing her to maintain a schedule that included frequent visits to his assisted living facility 2 hours away. The work was solitary and undemanding, requiring only basic security training and the ability to stay alert during quiet hours. Finding Iron Peak Fitness Center had been Riley's attempt to maintain some connection to physical fitness without revealing her true capabilities. She had needed a place where she could exercise regularly while perfecting her civilian persona. The gym's aggressive, male-dominated culture had actually been ideal for her purposes. It allowed her to blend into the background while observing how normal people approached fitness and training. The challenge coin that Riley carried had been Elena's parting gift, presented during the private ceremony attended only by Riley's immediate team members. "This isn't a goodbye," Elena had said. "This is a reminder that once you've earned the trident, you carry it forever. Someday, when the moment is right, you'll remember who you are." For 3 years, Riley had lived with the constant tension between her true identity and her necessary civilian persona. She had perfected the art of appearing weak while maintaining her strength, of seeming inexperienced while preserving her skills, of looking helpless while remaining one of the most dangerous people in any room she entered. The sacrifice had been worth it because David was alive and improving slowly under her care. But every morning when she walked into Iron Peak and submitted to the dismissive treatment of Tank's crew, Riley touched the challenge coin in her pocket and remembered that some battles require patience, some victories demand sacrifice, and some warriors prove their worth not by demonstrating their strength, but by choosing when to reveal it. Have you ever had to walk away from something you loved because someone you loved needed you more? Sometimes the greatest victories are the ones that nobody else will ever know about. The morning that would change everything at Iron Peak Fitness Center began with an atmosphere of heightened aggression that was unusual even by the gym's standards. Tank Morrison had been in a foul mood for 3 days running, ever since losing a major client to a competing personal trainer across town. His frustration was manifesting as increasingly hostile behavior toward everyone around him, but particularly toward anyone he perceived as not measuring up to his standards of serious training. Riley noticed the tension the moment she walked through the gym's entrance at 5:30 a.m. Tank's voice was louder than usual, his criticisms of other members more cutting, and his general demeanor suggested someone looking for a target to unleash his frustrations upon. She made her usual adjustments, selecting treadmill number 9 instead of her customary number 7, to create more distance from the main lifting area where Tank was holding court. The catalyst arrived in the form of 3 new members who had clearly never experienced anything like Iron Peak's intimidating culture. Jennifer Walsh was a 34-year-old elementary school teacher who had recently joined after her doctor recommended regular exercise to help manage stress-related health issues. She had brought along her 2 friends, Maria Santos, a nurse practitioner, and Rebecca Chen, an accountant. both of whom were equally unprepared for the gym's aggressive environment. The three women had arrived together around 6:15 a.m. during the peak of the morning rush when Tank's crew was at their most territorial. They had signed up for a group fitness consultation with Tank, unaware that his training philosophy involved psychological intimidation as much as physical conditioning. Tank saw them as an opportunity to demonstrate his authority in front of his regular followers, especially given his recent professional setbacks. "Ladies, welcome to Iron Peak," Tank announced loudly enough for the entire gym to hear. "I hope you're ready for some real training, not the kind of participation trophy workouts you get at those other places." His tone carried the familiar condescension that had become his trademark, but there was an edge to it that suggested he was planning to make an example of the newcomers. Jennifer, Maria, and Rebecca exchanged nervous glances but tried to maintain positive attitudes. They had paid for professional instruction and expected to receive guidance appropriate for their fitness levels. Instead, Tank immediately began criticizing their workout attire, their apparent lack of experience, and their unrealistic expectations about what could be accomplished without serious commitment. "Let's start with something basic," Tank said, leading them toward the free weight area. "We'll see if you can handle some real resistance training instead of those pink dumbbells you probably used before." He selected weights that were clearly too heavy for beginners, then proceeded to demonstrate exercises with form that prioritized impressive-looking weight over proper technique. Jennifer struggled to complete Tank's prescribed routine. He responded with loud commentary designed to embarrass her. "Come on, Jennifer, my grandmother could lift more than that. Are you even trying?" His crew laughed appreciatively, reinforcing the behavior that had made Iron Peak unwelcoming to so many potential members. The situation escalated when Maria attempted to ask questions about proper form. Tank's response was dismissive and mocking. "Maria, this isn't rocket science. You pick up the weight, you put it down. If you need me to explain basic concepts like gravity, maybe you should stick to yoga classes." Rebecca, who had been struggling with Tank's aggressive training approach, finally spoke up. "Excuse me, but we paid for instruction, not insults. Could you please show us the correct technique instead of just criticizing our efforts?" Tank's face darkened at being challenged in front of his audience. "Rebecca, let me explain something to you. This is a serious gym for serious people. If you can't handle honest feedback about your performance, maybe you should find a place that specializes in making people feel good about mediocrity." The confrontation was drawing attention from throughout the gym. Other members had stopped their workouts to watch the drama unfold, creating a circle of observers that made the three women feel increasingly trapped and humiliated. Tank was clearly enjoying the spectacle, using the situation to reassert his dominance over the gym's social hierarchy. Riley, who had been maintaining her usual invisible presence on the treadmill, felt something shift inside her as she watched the systematic humiliation taking place 20 feet away. These women weren't trying to challenge anyone or disrupt the gym's culture. They were simply trying to improve their health and had encountered a level of hostility that went far beyond anything resembling professional instruction. The breaking point came when Tank decided to escalate his intimidation tactics. "You know what, ladies? Let me show you what real training looks like." He moved toward the heavy bag area, gesturing for his crew to follow. "Jake, show these ladies how we handle conditioning work here at Iron Peak." Jake began attacking the heavy bag with aggressive combinations, each strike landing with impacts that shook the entire apparatus. The demonstration was clearly designed to intimidate the newcomers, showing them a level of intensity that they could never hope to match. Tank provided loud commentary about real athletes and serious training while the three women stood, frozen in obvious discomfort. "Maria, why don't you give it a try?" Tank said, his voice dripping with false encouragement. "Let's see if you can make that bag move even a little bit." Maria reluctantly approached the heavy bag, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but unwilling to back down in front of the watching crowd. She threw a tentative punch that barely moved the bag, prompting laughter from Tank's crew and additional commentary about effort and commitment. "Is that really the best you can do?" Tank pressed. "I've seen children hit harder than that." "Jennifer, Rebecca, maybe you can show Maria how to put some power behind a punch?" The humiliation was systematic and deliberate. Tank was using the three women as entertainment for his regular members, demonstrating his ability to break down newcomers while reinforcing the gym's culture of exclusion. Other members were either actively participating in the mockery or standing by silently, unwilling to challenge Tank's authority. Riley's hands had unconsciously clenched into fists as she watched the scene unfold. Every instinct developed during 8 years of Navy SEAL training was screaming at her to intervene, to put a stop to behavior that went far beyond normal gym banter into genuine harassment. The challenge coin in her pocket seemed to grow heavier. With each passing moment, the final straw came when Tank decided to make the situation physical. "Rebecca, since you seem to think you know so much about proper instruction, why don't you demonstrate your grappling skills?" He moved behind her without permission, putting his hands on her shoulders in a position that made her visibly uncomfortable. "Let me show you what real resistance feels like." Rebecca tried to step away, but Tank maintained his grip, using his size advantage to keep her in position while providing loud commentary about realistic training scenarios. The situation had crossed from verbal harassment into physical intimidation, and the watching crowd's laughter had taken on an ugly edge that suggested they were enjoying Rebecca's obvious distress. Riley's treadmill came to a stop for the first time in 3 months. She stepped off the machine before completing her usual 45-minute routine. Her movement was controlled and deliberate, but something fundamental had changed in her posture and bearing. The invisible woman who had spent months blending into the background was gone, replaced by someone who moved with the quiet confidence of a person who had never lost a fight that mattered. Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez's words echoed in Riley's memory. "Sometimes the most important mission is the one that chooses you." As she walked toward the confrontation that would expose everything she had worked to keep hidden, Riley touched the challenge coin in her pocket one final time and made peace with the consequences that were about to follow. The moment for hiding was over. Tank Morrison and his crew were about to discover that they had been sharing their gym with one of the most dangerous people any of them would ever encounter. And Rebecca, Maria, and Jennifer were about to learn that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. Have you ever reached a point where staying silent became more difficult than speaking up, even when you knew it would cost you everything? Sometimes protecting others requires sacrificing the protection you've built for yourself. Rayleigh's approach toward the confrontation was unlike anything anyone at Iron Peak had ever witnessed. Gone was the hesitant, almost apologetic way she typically moved through the gym. In its place was a predator's glide, silent, purposeful, and absolutely terrifying in its controlled precision. Her posture had straightened to reveal a frame that was lean muscle rather than delicate fragility. Her green eyes, which had always seemed distant and unfocused, now carried the sharp intensity of someone conducting a tactical assessment. The first person to notice her approach was Danny, who had been laughing along with Tank's harassment of the three women. Something about Riley's movement pattern triggered an instinctive alarm in his nervous system, the kind of primal recognition that prey animals experience when a predator enters their territory. His laughter died in his throat as he watched her close the distance with footsteps so quiet they seemed to absorb sound rather than create it. "Tank," Riley said, her voice cutting through the gym's noise with surgical precision. The single word carried such authority that conversations throughout the facility began to stop. This wasn't the tentative voice of the woman who had spent 3 months apologizing for her presence. This was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Tank turned toward Riley with an expression of amused surprise, clearly expecting to add her to his list of targets for the morning's entertainment. Well, look who finally decided to speak up. The cardio queen wants to join the conversation. Remove your hands from her, now. Riley's words were delivered without emotion, but the command carried an unmistakable threat. She had positioned herself exactly 8 feet from Tank, close enough to close the distance in less than a second, far enough to avoid seeming immediately aggressive. Tank's grip on Rebecca's shoulders tightened, his ego refusing to acknowledge any challenge to his authority. "Excuse me? I think you need to mind your own business and get back to your little jog. The adults are having a training session here." The transformation that occurred next happened so quickly that most observers would later struggle to describe the sequence of events. Riley moved forward with explosive speed that defied every assumption people had made about her physical capabilities. Her approach wasn't the wild rush of an angry amateur. It was the calculated advance of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of controlled violence. Tank had perhaps half a second to register that he was in serious trouble before Riley executed a textbook disabling technique that would have impressed her former SEAL teammates. She struck the pressure point on Tank's left wrist with her right thumb, applying exactly the amount of force needed to cause his grip on Rebecca to release involuntarily. Simultaneously, her left hand captured his right wrist and applied a joint lock that immediately immobilized his entire arm. The technique was executed with such precision that Tank found himself completely helpless before his brain could process what had happened. Riley had positioned his arm in a configuration that made any resistance impossible without risking serious injury. The hold demonstrated absolute mastery of leverage and anatomy, the kind of skill that takes years of intensive training to develop. "Step away from her," Riley said quietly, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had characterized her initial command. Tank, who outweighed her by at least 60 pounds and had spent years intimidating people through physical presence, found himself completely unable to resist as Riley guided him away from Rebecca, using nothing but precise manipulation of his vice. Captured joint. Jake stepped forward, apparently intending to help his friend, but stopped dead when Riley's eyes locked onto his. The look she gave him wasn't anger or aggression. It was the cold assessment of a professional evaluating a potential threat. Jake had served in the Army and had encountered truly dangerous people during his deployment. Every instinct he had developed warned him that interfering with Riley would be the worst mistake of his life. "Anyone else want to demonstrate proper training techniques?" Riley asked, her gaze sweeping across Tank's crew with the same clinical evaluation. Marcus, who had been preparing to intervene, found himself unconsciously stepping backward. Danny, who had always been quick with sarcastic comments, discovered that his voice had completely disappeared. Riley released Tank's wrist and stepped back, but her positioning remained tactically perfect. She had clear sight lines to all potential threats, multiple escape routes if the situation escalated, and maintained the optimal distance for responding to any aggressive movement. Her stance appeared casual to untrained observers, but anyone with combat experience would have recognized the coiled readiness of someone prepared for immediate violence. Tank rubbed his wrist, his face cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and growing anger. What the hell was that? Where did you learn to do that? Instead of answering, Riley turned to address Jennifer, Maria, and Rebecca, who were standing frozen in shock at what they had just witnessed. "Are you three okay? Did anyone hurt you?" "We're fine," Jennifer managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you. We didn't know what to do." "You don't need to do anything," Riley replied, her tone becoming gentle and reassuring. "This isn't your fault. Some people mistake intimidation for instruction." She glanced back at Tank with an expression that made it clear the comment was directed at him. Tank's anger was building as he processed the humiliation of being physically controlled by someone he had dismissed as irrelevant. You think you're tough because you know some martial arts moves? Let's see how you handle a real fight. Riley's response was to move toward the heavy bag that had been the center of Tank's earlier demonstration. She approached the apparatus with the same fluid precision that had characterized her disabling of Tank, but now her movement carried a different quality, the focused intensity of someone preparing to demonstrate exactly what real training looked like. She began with a simple jab, but the technique was flawless in ways that made Marcus's previous striking demonstration look like amateur hour. Her footwork, hip rotation, and follow-through demonstrated years of intensive combat training. The bag moved significantly despite the strike appearing almost casual. Then Riley began to increase the intensity. Her combinations flowed together with mechanical precision, each strike landing with devastating accuracy. Left jab, right cross. Left hook, right uppercut. The sequence was basic, but the execution was at a level that none of the gym's regulars had ever witnessed in person. The heavy bag, which weighed over 100 pounds, began to swing violently under the impact of her strikes. The most impressive aspect wasn't the power she generated, but the control she maintained. Every strike landed exactly where she intended it to land. Her breathing remained controlled throughout the demonstration. Her balance never wavered. Most tellingly, she showed no signs of fatigue despite generating enough force to move equipment that had barely budged under Jake's previous efforts. Riley concluded her demonstration with a spinning heel kick that sent the heavy bag swinging in a wide arc, the chain supporting it creaking under the stress. She stepped back and turned to face Tank's crew, who were staring at her with expressions of shock and dawning recognition. "That," she said calmly, "is what proper striking technique looks like. Notice the footwork, the hip engagement, and the follow-through. Also notice that I didn't need to grunt, scream, or put on a show to generate real power." The gym had fallen completely silent. Members who had been working out throughout the facility had stopped their routines to watch the confrontation. The quiet woman, who had spent 3 months being dismissed and mocked, had just demonstrated combat skills that exceeded anything any of them had ever seen. Tank stood in stunned silence, his worldview crumbling as he processed what he had witnessed. The person he had been mocking for months wasn't just competent. She was operating at a level that made his own abilities look like amateur posturing. Everything he thought he knew about strength, training, and dominance had just been redefined by someone he had considered beneath his notice. Riley walked back to where Jennifer, Maria, and Rebecca were standing, her demeanor returning to the gentle professionalism they had witnessed earlier. "Your training session is over for today. If you'd like some actual instruction on proper form and technique, I'd be happy to help, free of charge." The 3 women nodded gratefully, still processing what they had witnessed. They had come to Iron Peak expecting a normal workout, and instead had witnessed something that belonged in an action movie. But more importantly, they had been protected by someone who had risked her own anonymity to ensure their safety. As Riley began leading them toward a quiet corner of the gym for legitimate instruction, Tank finally found his voice. "Wait, who are you, really?" Riley paused and looked back at him, her expression neutral, but her eyes carrying depths that he was only beginning to understand. "I'm someone who knows the difference between real strength and performance art. I'm someone who believes that true warriors protect people instead of intimidating them. And I'm someone who's been trying very hard to mind my own business." She turned back toward the 3 women, but Tank called out again. "That fighting style, those techniques, where did you learn that?" Rayleigh's hand unconsciously moved to her pocket, touching the challenge coin that connected her to everything she had been before this moment. "From people who taught me that skills like these should only be used when someone needs protection." Have you ever witnessed someone reveal capabilities that completely changed how you saw them? Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who've been hiding in plain sight all along. The silence that followed Rayleigh's demonstration stretched for Nearly 30 seconds, an eternity in the typically noise-filled environment of Iron Peak Fitness Center. Members throughout the gym stood frozen, their own workouts completely forgotten as they processed what they had just witnessed. The quiet woman who had been invisible for 3 months had revealed herself to be something far beyond their comprehension. Tommy Martinez was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying the tone of awed recognition. Jesus Christ. That stance, that footwork, those combinations. He trailed off, shaking his head as pieces of a puzzle began falling into place in his mind. I've seen that fighting style before, but only in military training videos. Sarah Chun, who had dismissed Riley's earlier accidental interventions, was staring with wide eyes as she mentally replayed every interaction she'd had with the woman. She now realized she had completely misjudged. The way she moves, the way she carries herself. How did we not see it? But it was Kevin Walsh, the desk attendant who had been monitoring security cameras for months, who made the connection that sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. His face had gone pale as he processed what he had witnessed, cross-referencing it with footage he had reviewed countless times. "Those techniques," he said slowly, his voice carrying growing certainty. "That level of precision. That's not just military training, that's special operations." Jake Stevens, who was still rubbing his shoulder where Riley had casually moved him aside during her approach to Tank, found his voice trembling as he spoke. "Special ops? You mean like ... Navy SEALs?" The words hung in the air like an accusation. Navy SEALs represented the absolute pinnacle of military training, operators, who existed in a realm of capability that most people could only imagine. The idea that one of these legendary warriors had been hiding among them for months, enduring their mockery while possessing skills that could have ended any of them in seconds, was almost too overwhelming to process. Sarge Kellerman emerged from his office, drawn by the unusual silence that had replaced his gym's typical cacophony of aggressive training sounds. His experienced eyes immediately assessed the scene, Tank standing in obvious shock, his crew looking like they had seen a ghost, and Riley positioned protectively near 3 shaken women. The gym owner's military background allowed him to read the tactical positioning and body language that told the story of what had just occurred. "Well, I'll be damned," Sarge said quietly, his voice carrying the recognition of someone who had served alongside elite operators during his own military career. He studied Riley's stance, her alert but controlled demeanor, and the way she maintained awareness of everyone in her vicinity while appearing completely calm. "Phoenix." Riley's head snapped toward Sarge, her eyes narrowing as she processed his use of a call sign that should have been unknown to anyone at Iron Peak. The challenge coin in her pocket seemed to burn against her fingers as she realized that her carefully constructed civilian identity was completely compromised. "Master Chief Petty Officer James Phoenix Carter," Sarge continued, his voice filled with respectful recognition. "I served with your father during Operation Neptune Spear. Heard stories about his daughter who followed in his footsteps. Never imagined I'd have the honor of meeting the legendary Riley Shadow Carter in my own gym." The revelation hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. Riley Carter wasn't just any Navy SEAL. She was the daughter of a legend, someone whose reputation had become mythical within military circles. Stories of James Phoenix, Carter's impossible missions, and unwavering courage were told in special operations communities around the world. Marcus Rodriguez, who had spent months dismissing Riley's presence while bragging about his own amateur MMA training, felt his knees go weak as he processed the implications. "Shadow Carter," he whispered, the call sign triggering memories of news reports and military documentaries he had watched obsessively. The SEAL who rescued those hostages in Syria. The operator who completed that impossible mission in Afghanistan. Tank. Morrison's face had cycled through several colors as the magnitude of his months of mockery became clear. He had been treating one of America's most elite warriors like she was a wannabe fitness enthusiast. Every condescending comment, every dismissive gesture, every moment of casual disrespect had been directed at someone who could have ended his life with her bare hands before he realized he was in danger. "I don't understand," Jennifer said quietly, looking between Riley and the stunned faces surrounding them. "What's a Navy SEAL? Why is everyone acting like ... Navy SEALs," Sarge explained, his voice carrying deep respect, "are the most elite special operations forces in the world. They're warriors who complete missions that other military units consider impossible. And Riley here isn't just any SEAL. She's from a family of legends." The pieces were falling into place for everyone who had witnessed Riley's seemingly accidental interventions over the past months. Tommy remembered her clumsy collision with Marcus that had prevented a serious injury. Danny recalled her accident with the kettlebell rack that had saved him from being crushed. Every incident that they had dismissed as lucky timing now revealed itself as the precise intervention of someone who had been protecting them without their knowledge. "All those times," Jake said slowly, his voice filled with dawning realization, "when you helped people but made it look accidental, you were protecting us." Riley remained silent, her expression neutral as she watched the group process their new understanding of who she was. The careful invisibility she had maintained for 3 months was completely shattered, but there was something almost liberating about no longer having to hide her true capabilities. Marcus stepped forward, his earlier bravado completely replaced by genuine humility. "The way you moved when you stopped Tank, the precision of those strikes on the heavy bag. That was real combat experience, wasn't it?" 8 years active duty," Riley replied simply, her voice carrying no pride or boastfulness. "Multiple deployments. Special operations missions that I can't discuss in detail." Danny shook his head in amazement. "And you've been coming here for months, letting us treat you like you didn't know anything about fitness. Watching us act like we were hot shit while you could probably take all of us at the same time." "It wasn't about what I could do," Riley said quietly. "It was about what I needed to do. I came here to exercise and mind my own business. I stayed invisible because that's what my situation required." Tank finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Why? Why didn't you say anything? Why did you let us ... "Because revealing who I was would have changed everything," Riley replied, her eyes meeting his with steady intensity. "I didn't want to be treated differently because of my background. I didn't want people to be afraid of me or expect me to be something I'm not anymore." The weight of that statement settled over the group as they began to understand the sacrifice Riley had made. She had given up not just her military career, but her identity as an elite warrior, choosing instead to live as an ordinary person in order to care for someone who needed her. Sarge approached Riley with the respectful bearing that one veteran extends to another. "Ma'am, I want to apologize for the treatment you've received in my facility. If I had known ... "You couldn't have known," Riley interrupted gently. "That was the point. I needed to be normal, to blend in, to be forgettable. Your gym gave me exactly what I was looking for." Sarah Chun spoke up, her voice filled with shame. "We treated you terribly. The comments, the dismissal, the way we acted like you didn't matter." Riley's expression softened slightly. "You treated me the way I presented myself. I worked very hard to appear incompetent and unremarkable. You responded to the person I pretended to be, not the person I actually am." The revelation was spreading throughout the gym as word passed from member to member. The treadmill girl was Shadow Carter. The quiet woman they had ignored was a Navy SEAL, the person they had considered beneath. Their notice was one of the most dangerous people any of them would ever encounter. As the shock continued to ripple through the crowd, Riley remained focused on the 3 women she had protected. Jennifer, Maria, and Rebecca were still processing what they had witnessed, but their expressions showed gratitude mixed with awe. They had been saved by someone whose very existence seemed to belong in an action movie rather than a neighborhood. "Gym, ladies," Riley said gently. "If you'd still like some actual fitness instruction, I'd be happy to help. But I understand if you'd prefer to find a different gym after all this excitement." Rebecca stepped forward, her voice steady despite everything she had witnessed. "I think we'd like that very much. If you're willing to teach us, we'd like to learn from someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Have you ever discovered that someone you completely underestimated was actually extraordinary? Sometimes the most remarkable people are the ones who work hardest to appear ordinary." Word of Riley's true identity spread beyond Iron Peak Fitness Center with remarkable speed. By noon that same day, her phone had begun ringing with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. By evening, the calls had evolved into formal offers that would have changed her life completely if she had been willing to accept them. The first call came from Colonel Martinez at the Special Operations Command Headquarters in Tampa. His voice carried the urgent tone of someone who had been tasked with bringing a valuable asset back into active service. "Miss Carter, I'm calling on behalf of SOCOM leadership. We've been made aware of your current civilian status, and I want you to know that there's immediate interest in discussing your return to active duty." Riley listened politely as Colonel Martinez outlined opportunities that would have been career-defining for any special operations professional. Joint Task Force positions in counter-terrorism operations, training roles at the Naval Special Warfare Center, leadership positions that would put her on track for command of her own SEAL team within 2 years. The Colonel emphasized that her experience and proven capabilities made her exactly the kind of operator that Special Operations Forces needed in an increasingly complex global security environment. "We understand that you left for personal reasons," Colonel Martinez continued. "But circumstances change, and the nation needs experienced professionals like yourself. We're prepared to offer significant incentives, including advanced rank-upon, re-enlistment and assignment preferences that would allow you to remain stateside for family considerations." Riley thanked him for the offer but explained that her personal situation hadn't changed. David still needed full-time care, and her commitment to him remained absolute. The Colonel persisted, suggesting creative solutions, including military, family support services and specialized care facilities, but Riley remained firm in her decision. The second offer came from an unexpected source. Alina Vasquez, now promoted to commander and serving as director of Naval Special Warfare Training, called that evening with a proposition that acknowledged Riley's current priorities while utilizing her exceptional skills. "Riley, I know you won't return to operational duty, and I respect that decision completely," Alina said. "But what if I told you there was a way to serve without compromising your commitment to David?" Elena's offer was sophisticated and tempting. The Navy was establishing a new training facility specifically focused on developing special operations psychology and resilience. They needed someone with Riley's combination of operational experience and natural teaching ability to design curriculum that would help future SEALs handle the mental challenges of elite military service. "This wouldn't be active duty," Elena explained. "It would be a civilian contractor position with significant autonomy. You could work largely from home, traveling only for specific training events. The compensation would be substantial, and the work would directly impact the preparation of the next generation of special operations personnel." Riley found herself genuinely considering Elena's offer. The position would allow her to contribute meaningfully to military readiness while maintaining her primary focus on David's care. She could share the psychological techniques that had helped her survive impossible missions, potentially saving lives by better preparing operators for the mental challenges they would face. But even as she considered the possibility, Riley realized that accepting would inevitably lead to increased visibility and recognition that she had spent 3 years trying to avoid. She would become a public figure in the special operations community, speaking at conferences and training events that would make her anonymity impossible to maintain. The third wave of offers came from the private sector, where Riley's reputation had triggered intense interest from military contractors and security firms. Alexander Steele, CEO of Titan Security Solutions, personally flew to Millbrook to meet with Riley and present an offer that dwarfed anything the military could provide. "Miss Carter, your reputation precedes you," Steele said during their meeting. "At a discreet restaurant outside town, we're prepared to offer you a position as Director of Training Operations, with a compensation package that includes a 7-figure base salary, comprehensive benefits, and equity participation in our company." Titan Security Solutions specialized in providing protection for high-value civilian targets and training security personnel for Fortune 500 companies. Steele explained that Riley's combination of tactical expertise and psychological insight would revolutionize their training programs, making them the premier security contractor in the industry. "You would have complete control over curriculum development and implementation," Steele continued. "We're talking about establishing training facilities that would rival anything the military offers, with the budget to hire the best instructors and acquire the most advanced equipment." The financial aspects of Steele's offer were staggering. The base salary alone would provide more than enough to ensure David received the absolute best care available. The equity participation could eventually make Riley wealthy enough to establish her own foundation focused on supporting families dealing with traumatic brain injuries. But Steele's final pitch revealed the real reason Riley ultimately rejected his offer. "With your name attached to our company, we'd have immediate credibility with every potential client. Riley's shadow Carter's endorsement would be worth millions in government contracts alone." Riley realized that accepting would mean trading on her military reputation for commercial gain, something that felt fundamentally wrong given the sacrifices that reputation represented. Her SEAL training and combat experience weren't products to be sold to the highest bidder. They were sacred responsibilities that should only be used to serve others, not to generate profit. The most unexpected offer came from Hollywood, where Riley's story had somehow reached producers looking for authentic military consultants. The initial approach was modest, consulting work on a film about female special operations personnel, but quickly evolved into discussions about Riley serving as the central figure in a biographical project. "Your story has everything," explained Amanda Foster, a producer who had worked on several successful military-themed films. The legendary military family, the elite training, the impossible missions, the sacrifice for family. This could be the definitive film about women in special operations. Foster outlined a development deal that would involve Riley as both consultant and executive producer, with creative control over how her story was presented. The financial terms were generous, but more importantly, Foster emphasized the positive impact the film could have on public understanding of military service and family sacrifice. Riley was intrigued by the possibility of using her story to highlight the challenges faced by military families, particularly those dealing with combat-related injuries and disabilities. A well-made film could raise awareness and potentially inspire policy changes that would help other families in similar situations. However, the more Riley considered the Hollywood offer, the more she realized that public exposure on that scale would fundamentally change her relationship with David and compromise the privacy that had become essential to their healing process. Fame, even well-intentioned fame, would make it impossible to maintain the normal life she had worked so hard to create. Each offer represented a path back to the world she had left behind, opportunities to reclaim her identity as an elite warrior and achieve recognition for her exceptional capabilities. The military positions would restore her sense of purpose and service. The private sector roles would provide financial security beyond anything she could achieve in civilian life. The Hollywood project could give her a platform to advocate for causes she cared deeply about. But as Riley sat in her small apartment that night, reviewing written proposals and considering the life-changing opportunities spread across her kitchen table, she found herself thinking about David's progress over the past 3 years. The slow but steady improvements in his cognitive function. The moments of clarity that were becoming more frequent. The way he had started asking about her day and expressing concern for her well-being. Riley walked to David's room and watched him sleep, his face peaceful in a way that had taken months of patient care to achieve. 3 years ago, doctors had been uncertain whether he would ever live independently again. Now, there was genuine hope that continued rehabilitation might eventually allow him to return to some version of normal life. The offers represented everything she had given up, but they also represented everything she would have to give up again. The choice wasn't really between different career opportunities. It was between the person she had been and the person she had chosen to become. Riley gathered the proposals and placed them in a drawer, knowing that her decision had already been made the moment she walked away from her SEAL career 3 years ago. Some commitments transcend personal ambition, and some victories can only be achieved through the willingness to remain invisible. Have you ever been offered everything you thought you wanted, only to realize that what you actually needed was something completely different? Sometimes the greatest opportunities are the ones we have the wisdom to decline. 6 months after the confrontation that had revealed her true identity, Riley returned to Iron Peak Fitness Center to find a transformed environment that bore little resemblance to the intimidating fortress of male aggression it had once been. The changes weren't dramatic or obvious, but they were profound in ways that spoke to the lasting impact of her brief moment of revelation. Tank Morrison was still there, but he moved through the gym with a humility that would have been unimaginable before that fateful morning. His training methods had evolved from intimidation-based dominance to genuine instruction, focused on helping people achieve their personal fitness goals. He no longer made mocking comments about other members' capabilities, and his voice rarely rose above a conversational tone during training sessions. The transformation hadn't been immediate. In the days following Riley's revelation, Tank had gone through a crisis of identity that forced him to confront every assumption he had made about strength, authority, and what it meant to be a serious athlete. The realization that he had been mocking someone who could have ended him without effort had shattered his ego completely. But what emerged from that destruction was something better. I spent years thinking that being the strongest person in the room meant I was the most important person in the room, Tank confided to Riley during one of her visits. You taught me that real strength is about lifting others up, not putting. But as Riley sat in her small apartment that night, reviewing written proposals and considering the life-changing opportunities spread across her kitchen table, she found herself thinking about David's progress over the past 3 years. The slow but steady improvements in his cognitive function. The moments of clarity that were becoming more frequent. The way he had started asking about her day and expressing concern for her well-being. Riley walked to David's room and watched him sleep, his face peaceful in a way that had taken months of patient care to achieve. 3 years ago, doctors had been uncertain whether he would ever live independently again. Now, there was genuine hope that continued rehabilitation might eventually allow him to return to some version of normal life. The offers represented everything she had given up, but they also represented everything she would have to give up again. The choice wasn't really between different career opportunities. It was between the person she had been and the person she had chosen to become. Riley gathered the proposals and placed them in a drawer, knowing that her decision had already been made the moment she walked away from her SEAL career 3 years ago. Some commitments transcend personal ambition, and some victories can only be achieved through the willingness to remain invisible. Have you ever been offered everything you thought you wanted, only to realize that what you actually needed was something completely different? Sometimes the greatest opportunities are the ones we have the wisdom to decline. 6 Months after the confrontation that had revealed her true identity, Riley returned to Iron Peak Fitness Center to find a transformed environment that bore little resemblance to the intimidating fortress of male aggression it had once been. The changes weren't dramatic or obvious, but they were profound in ways that spoke to the lasting impact of her brief moment of revelation. Tank Morrison was still there, but he moved through the gym with a humility that would have been unimaginable before that fateful morning. His training methods had evolved from intimidation-based dominance to genuine instruction, focused on helping people achieve their personal fitness goals. He no longer made mocking comments about other members' capabilities, and his voice rarely rose above a conversational tone during training sessions. The transformation hadn't been immediate. In the days following Riley's revelation, Tank had gone through a crisis of identity that forced him to confront every assumption he had made about strength, authority, and what it meant to be a serious athlete. The realization that he had been mocking someone who could have ended him without effort had shattered his ego completely. But what emerged from that destruction was something better. I spent years thinking that being the strongest person in the room meant I was the most important person in the room. Tank confided to Riley during one of her visits. "You taught me that real strength is about lifting others up, not putting them down. I've been trying to apply that lesson every day since." Jake Stevens had undergone his own transformation, abandoning his previous focus on impressive lifting numbers in favor of functional fitness that actually improved his daily life. He had begun studying combat techniques not to dominate others, but to better understand the discipline and mental focus that elite training required. His new humility had made him a better training partner and a more supportive presence in the gym. Marcus Rodriguez had perhaps changed the most dramatically. His encounter with Riley had forced him to confront the gap between his amateur MMA training and actual combat capability. Rather than becoming discouraged, he had dedicated himself to legitimate martial arts instruction, approaching his training with the respect and seriousness that the discipline deserved. He often spoke about Riley's intervention as the moment he stopped playing at being a fighter and started actually learning to fight. The 3 women Riley had protected that morning had become regular members of Iron Peak, but their presence represented something larger than just individual fitness journeys. Jennifer Walsh had discovered a passion for strength training that had transformed not just her physical health, but her confidence in all areas of life. Maria Santos had begun teaching basic self-defense classes for women at the community center, sharing techniques that Riley had taught her during their sessions together. Rebecca Chun had started a support group for people dealing with gym intimidation, creating a safe space for newcomers to learn proper fitness techniques without fear of judgment. Riley's influence extended far beyond the people who had been present that morning. Word of her story had spread through Millbrook's fitness community, creating a ripple effect that had changed how people approached training and how they treated others in athletic environments. Gym owners throughout the area had begun implementing policies focused on creating inclusive, supportive atmospheres rather than exclusive clubs for the already athletic. Sarge Kellerman had made the most concrete changes to Iron Peak itself. New member orientation now included explicit discussions about respect, mutual support, and the diversity of backgrounds that people brought to their fitness journeys. The motivational posters that had once focused exclusively on individual achievement were supplemented with messages about community, mentorship, and using strength to help others. Having Riley here, even briefly, reminded me why I opened this place, Sarge explained to new members during orientation sessions. It wasn't to create a hierarchy of who was strongest or toughest. It was to provide a space where people could become the best. Riley's story had begun to spread beyond Millbrook, shared through military networks and veteran communities, as an example of how elite training and warrior skills could be applied to civilian challenges. She received letters from other former special operations personnel who were struggling with their own transitions to civilian life. seeking guidance about how to find purpose outside of military service. These correspondences led to Riley developing an informal mentorship network for veterans dealing with similar challenges. She would meet with former operators who were struggling to adapt their skills to civilian environments, helping them understand that their training remained valuable even if their mission had changed. Her approach emphasized that true warriors found ways to continue protecting others regardless of the uniform they wore or the environment they operated in. The gym that had once made her feel invisible had become a place where her presence created positive change simply through her willingness to be authentically herself. Riley had learned that hiding her capabilities hadn't made her weak. It had given her the opportunity to choose when and how to use her strength in ways that served others rather than herself. As she completed her morning routine at Iron Peak, Riley reflected on the journey that had brought her from the invisibility of her early months to her current role as an informal mentor and protector. She had discovered that some battles are won not through the demonstration of superior force, but through the patient cultivation of better values in the people around you. The woman who had once been dismissed as irrelevant had become the most important person in the room, not because of her impressive capabilities, but because of her commitment to using those capabilities in service of others. Tank's crew had learned that real strength protects the vulnerable instead of exploiting them. The broader Iron Peak community had learned that fitness was about personal growth rather than social dominance. And Riley had learned that warriors don't stop being warriors when they leave the military. They just find new missions that require the same fundamental commitment to serving something greater than themselves. Have you ever discovered that your greatest impact came not from showcasing your abilities, but from quietly using them to help others become better versions of themselves? Sometimes the most important victories are the ones that change hearts and minds rather than just winning competitions. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.